And I'm pleased to introduce our presenter this morning, Scott Holter. Scott is the Director of Business Solutions at Meaden Moore, and he can give you a little bit more background about himself, and he's here to present how to improve the experience with ERP, CRM, and enterprise software. So please welcome Scott.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending. I won't spend too much time giving you our background. There's a slide at the end of the presentation that talks about us, but I run the consulting division of Meaden Moore, which is more known as a CPA firm. It's headquartered in Cleveland, and my group has an office and 5 employees in Meadville. So my second home has been Northwest Pennsylvania since I was a little kid, but I am sitting here in our Cleveland office. And I do want to tell you, and maybe perhaps the primary number one thing that I wanted to cover is I'm not here to sell you any software. We are an independent consulting firm. We help clients with their enterprise software challenges, mostly manufacturers and mostly ERP, but we come at it from an independent standpoint. So you're not going to hear a sales pitch about me trying to sell you licenses today. So with this, today's agenda is about getting more out of your current systems. On Thursday, we're going to cover, if all else fails, how do we go about buying something that best fits us for the long run? But today is about, we'd really like to keep what we've got. How can we get better with what we already own and maybe augment it? And we, about 20 years ago, we adopted a philosophy that came out of a guy who wrote a book called Business Process Improvement named James Harrington. And you can read this quote, but it talks about that measurement is what leads to control and eventually improvement. If you can't measure something, you can't understand it. If you can't understand it, you can't control it. And if you can't control it, you can't improve it. And this is similar to other schools of thought going back 100 years ago, the Hawthorne studies, what have you, that talked about keeping an eye on things, measuring things. Almost in and of themselves, you'll start driving improvement. A more colorful example came from the CEO of a manufacturing company that we were working with about a little over 20 years ago. And we really devised this methodology and approach based on his guidance and really understanding what a CEO is looking for. And more colorful than Harrington, he said, I know if the machines that I've invested in are being used. I walk out on the shop floor and I see them running. I see materials stacked up behind them. And then I get machine utilization graphs and charts, things that these days have come to known as OEE. And then he said, but I don't know if people are using and he used some expletives, ERP system. He said, all I know is that the software company told me it would increase our inventory turns from 2 to 4 or 6, and they've dropped to 1. And it was this comment about utilization that really struck home with us. And we said, well, let's measure. We can't use time as a metric, but maybe we use the features. Are you adhering to the features that you should be using? Very similar to an ISO audit, we did an ERP audit. And in these sections here, master production scheduling, MRP, shop floor control, and operations scheduling, we identified a series of features that we felt they should be using in the abstract. We identified that out of the 137 of them, the current software could do, theoretically, 102 of them, which is a 74% fit. And in the old letter grading scheme, that's a C. But what we also found was they were only using 70 of those 102. So depending on how you want to measure utilization, they're at 70 out of 102, which is a 69%, or 70 out of 137, a 51%. And we broke that out by various areas. And this was a first rudimentary. You'll see that this was produced in a spreadsheet, but it gave rise to something that we've been doing more since then. What I thought I'd show you now is a company that we have a before and after picture of. They're relatively small, kind of midway between Cleveland and Pennsylvania, in the eastern half of Ohio, assembler of flow control devices. They had been on their ERP system for 10 years. They wondered if they should replace it. They were on the latest version, but nobody was particularly pleased with it except for accounting. We hear that story a lot, but and we'll touch on that. And so what I'm going to do is show you some of the analysis we did with them. And what we showed them, and I'm going to blow this up just a little bit further. And mostly we surveyed their supply chain areas. This is a report now out of a system that we've produced called the ERP Navigator. But in sales order processing, we found that their current system, which is the latest, does 96% of what they need it to do, but they were only using 42%. In product master data, their bills of material, their items, this is where they were doing well. They had the things set up. But other areas that we felt they should be using, such as demand forecasting, not turned on at all. Production scheduling, not turned on at all. MRP, 10.7% utilization. If you look up and down these red blocks, you'll see that the level of utilization was poor other than the basic setup data, their process master data, their routings, their bills of material and their items. And that was about it. So overall, what we showed them was their system, and especially since they were on the latest and newest version, was a good solid 92% fit, but they were only using about a quarter of those capabilities. Not just 25% of the capabilities that the system has in total, but 24.3% of the ones they agreed they should be using. And so it's a little bit like, this first step in improvement is you've got to admit there's a problem. If we drill down, if we show the after picture, this was 2 years later after a lot of reinvigoration, some training. We spent a lot of time helping them manage the software vendor that had admittedly failed in their endeavor to help this company implement it. And while it wasn't up to an A level of a 90%, you'll see that 92% fit was still there, but we were able to collectively get them up to a 70% utilization. You see, we got almost all of the red out, and all of the red right now is concentrated in scheduling, which is kind of the last thing we want to get rolling. But you see, we're able to get them using work orders up to 90%, inventory up to 99%. So this is the idea, and this is at an area level. We can drill down and see how they showed up. This is the before picture, where it shows that in fulfillment, in sales order promising, in kitting, these things were not being done. So this is sort of your pulse check, your health check. This is the one that shows them at the 24% utilization. Oh, and this is, and then this is the one that shows them at the 64% utilization. So not sure, this must have been a different client. I'll close that one. But anyway, so that is the idea here is to use measurements to get a client to adopt their systems better. Now, had the system fit shown less than, say, 70%, less than 80%, we might have recommended looking for a new system. Close those, and we'll get back to the presentation. So what we wanted to show here is that there's really a 7-step approach to getting better. And the first one is to just define goals and objectives, then a strategy for using your ERP system, designing your business processes, identifying, then once we've done that, detailed requirements. And once you've done those first four, then you can kind of measure the system's fit and utilization to your company. And then most often, unless you're doing things really well and it's just a matter of let's keep the steady course going, then we'll want to do things like look at the costs and the potential benefits or return on investment, because there often is, and I'll give you by example, a client that recently identified their improvement effort was going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000. And then we'll talk about how we actually close the gaps that between functionality and utilization. So the way we've been doing these projects is through our tool called we've branded it the ERP Navigator. I'm going to sign on. It's a little web-based application. And I'm going to flip over to a client of ours that's in Northwest Pennsylvania. I'm not naming them, but if you're in the St. Mary's area, you probably know that there's a lot of powdered metal molders over in that region. We started off with them just trying to get an understanding of their needs, their organizational structure, their customers and their markets, what industries they participate in characteristics of their manufacturing processing, which is molding and sintering, and some secondary machining operations, characteristics of their raw materials. And then we focused on getting some overall business level goals and objectives. And this is fulfilling the number one step in the process, and that is forget about using ERP system. That's not an end, that's a means to an end. What are the business level problems that you've got, such as we want to get rid of duplicate data entry. We want to be able to track our customers' packaging requirements, have better integration between engineering and manufacturing. And so these are the objectives that we set out with their executives in the first day or two of work with them. And then we came and said, what does an ERP system mean for them? So you notice here, we took marketing and Salesforce management out of scope because CRM, as we all know it, was not important to them. But we did include some of what most companies consider global features related to ERP systems like multi-company and multi-site, some personal productivity tools, time and attendance. In engineering, we included product master data management, including engineering change control, but not a product configurator or project management. Manufacturing, MRP, scheduling, work orders, jobs, as some know them, even some repetitive production. So all of this was about scoping. And then once we got down to the scope, then it's into the nitty gritty of things. So we met with their purchasing department and talked about, do we need to do purchase requisitions? And what we uncovered is they really are doing them. They aren't doing them in their ERP system, for example. So we need the ability to do purchase requisitions instead of doing them via email and then rekeying all the data. We see this as an opportunity to automate our processes to one way to fulfill that goal. If I go back to our check on last April, notice we identified that the current system that they own provides that capability, but they aren't using it. Same thing for requisitions, in detail by inventory item. It's a requirement, it fulfills an objective. Our current system does it, but we never turned it on. And we can see across the board, this section had a lot of opportunities for improvement, a requisition approval process. And so after we had gone through this process with them, we came up with a work list, which was very simple to come up with and just say, look at our current ERP system, Infor is visual. Let's look at the things that we put the highest weights on, strategic or just medium requirements. Show me include my current system status that I'm not using. So I've put a high weight on it. My current system offers it out of the box. We need it and we aren't using it. Here's a working list of all of the features that we identified for them that we just need to turn on. And so the effort here was, and notice there's a lot of them, a scrap percent at the component level, identifying their primary suppliers. These are things that all weren't being used. Actually, I looked at their more recent audit. Let me drop back to their last audit. But this was a good list of a working list of things that we could really hone in on, what was required that we aren't using, that in this case, these are things that we could do via customization, adding fields to screens, do customizations. So we can look and see, do I want to use customization? Do I want to use, or do I say, show me what my system does out of the box. A full yes response. And if I refresh, this is the working list of features that we can just turn on. So the point of that exercise is we can give the same scorecards. We can come over here and show them, we showed them their scorecard for their last April pulse check. It's been about a year over data. And we'll run the score by area. But what we showed them was, which is very common, their current system was plenty good of a fit. They just weren't using, they were only using about half of the features. And so our recommendation to them was, in this case, you've got a 92% fitting system. If you upgrade, oddly enough, you're going to lose some features in the quality department because the company, the software vendor was leaving behind their quality module, which was a first to us actually see an upgrade create worse functionality. But again, their current version of their current system was only being about half used. And so this is our recommendation is in these is a re-engineering or continuous improvement approach, not throw out the system. And so it started with going through those, turning on those features and doing some customizations where appropriate. And so we see this very frequently, that ERP systems theoretically have a great fit, but they're not used very well. And we've wondered if ERP systems are just a Rubik's cube that are frustrating and hard to solve. We've even heard one person say in this company, maybe ERP for us means Excel replacement program. Our view of that, while that's funny, is if you're just going to use the accounting modules, then you might as well go buy QuickBooks and take the cheap way out. The RP in ERP requirements planning is the hard part. And the difficulty shows up in some end user level satisfaction surveys. Before we go, Molly, are there any questions so far?
None so far.
Okay. What this is not our own survey. We've gotten this from various aspects and various research firms, Gartner, some of the large consulting firms like KPMG, said that only 57% of companies report that they're fairly or very satisfied, which means 43% are very or fairly dissatisfied or neutral. And of that 43%, roughly half, it ranges, they failed to implement their enterprise software system. And the ones that did go forward, a little bit more than half went over budget, went over timeline, or received less than anticipated benefits. And what our research with our small and mid-sized manufacturing and distribution clients has shown is that we see a lot of gaps. And these gaps show up for a variety of reasons, but these are big picture changes or business model or procedural process changes that we see in companies that lead to enterprise software floundering or outright failure. We've seen clients over the last 15 years where someone was just an assembly shop and they backward integrated and added injection molding. They were a distributor that acquired a manufacturing business and tried to run the manufacturing business with distribution software. A job shop launched its own product line and found that their job shop system was lacking some needed features to manage their own designs. A capital equipment manufacturer began providing service in the field to repair the equipment that their customers had purchased from them. Couple that we see often have to do with overseas expansions or expanding into other lines of business. Then those darn customers get in the way of things, because those customers, maybe even more so than government agencies, levy requirements on us for things like EDI and e-commerce, consignment or minimum inventory requirements, safety stocks, if you will, Kanban programs. Packaging, box or container size specs, specific labeling, all kinds of documents that go along with your shipments, traceability, and then all of those industry specific requirements like ITAR and the FDA that those levy on us. Certainly there's the regulatory environments like the AIAG, FDA, GDPR for data. So all kinds of changes in the market change the goalpost. They move the goalpost back for us. Another angle that we're seeing outside of customers or the external market that is causing challenges to enterprise software utilization is employee turnover and that loss of institutional knowledge. One of our clients reported to us that there are 3 primary implementers. One is retired and is just recently retired and is 74 years old. One has announced his retirement and is 64, and the other is 68 and has suggested that he'd like to retire before he turns 70. Those 3 were in one case, the power users of their system. And the knowledge really is about to start leaving with them because they haven't made a successful transition of that institutional knowledge to some of the younger folks coming up behind them. And what they risk is losing that expertise with the current system. And so what all of these lead to is some partial implementations. I work for an accounting firm, and yet we derogatorily say that too many ERP systems are implemented like accounting systems, where maybe we can process sales orders and invoices and POs and vendor invoices and have a general ledger. Companies have been doing that for 40, 50 years. But where we start to see degradation is maintenance of bills of material and routings, inventory, work order processing. The accounting system is necessary but not sufficient for what is being called digital transformation today. We've used the phrase that companies aren't frosting the cake. For example, quoting and estimating, we still see generally done outside the system on spreadsheets, on paper. Product configurators and pricing and contract management are often done outside this ERP system that was designed to manage them. Engineering change control is often done on spreadsheets or paper-based systems. And then all of those things that Apex, now the Association for Supply Chain Management, gave us, like MPS and MRP and capacity planning, finite scheduling, traceability, and cycle counting. These are areas that we often see unimplemented. More and more, we're seeing a lot of interest in maintenance management, quality management, and business analytics, as well as integrated CRM, but they're often left on the sidelines for you football fans. And so the characteristics that we see are frustrated users, that it may be slow responses to customers, unreliable delivery dates, excess inventory in some items and shortages in others, a lot of duplicate data entry, and all of these things end up with a lot of management intervention in schedules and plans. Overtime one week, idle time the next, maybe inaccurate inventory records. This one was a favorite of ours because it came right from a client, and it was one of their objectives, which was we want our sales reps to stop getting blindsided when they go into a customer account on a sales call. So that's kind of the background. And what we see is the gaps we've categorized into 4 categories. And we're going to start with that here. Before I go on, are there any questions up to this point?
No, there are not.
Okay. So functionality gaps are the most common. They're often the easiest to address. And it just takes, if we serve any role there with our clients, it's just getting them some momentum and overcoming the inertia. Oftentimes we'll hear the software doesn't do what I need it to do. Maybe we've gotten into blending and mixing and we need formulation management, or we have a distribution package that lacks manufacturing features. We're missing entire modules. The client that I showed over in the St. Mary's area, they had they own a system that's very modular, and they didn't purchase many modules that are available from the software vendor, but for whatever reason, the software vendor didn't sell them to them, or just they missed out when they were negotiating the contract. And so what that led to was a lot of manual processes. So functionality gaps, oftentimes an upgrade will help mitigate those. If not an upgrade, certainly, as in the case of this client over in the St. Mary's area, purchasing some add-ons from the software publisher. And in one case, we found that we needed to go off-site or off to a third party to get some bolt-ons to handle some of their labeling and container tracking. Workflow management tools are fantastic to help automate some of the system that often is done via email. If your business processes, and we'll talk about how we map those out later, rely on a lot of emails going back and forth, workflow inside these ERP systems can be a great help. The last three are sort of our last three resorts, but our view is they're often still better than ripping out and replacing. Some systems are inherently customizable, and if they provide a tool set that allows you to develop customizations, you own the system, it's a sunk cost, maybe customizing it and can breathe new life into it. That client that I mentioned that we talked about from 2001, they did some extensive customizations that got them 6 more years out of their software before they ended up replacing it. So it was certainly a worthwhile investment. Modifying the source code goes beyond just a simple customization. That now can paint you and prevent you from upgrades. So we rate that as the second to last resort, but we still think, all other things being equal, replacement is a last resort. Utilization gaps are more common. As you saw from some of the data, we've been working with clients that have 80 to 90% fitting systems with 25 to 50% utilization. In those cases, we're just not using the features that are available. Sometimes it was attitudinal. We took a very transaction processing towards implementing it. I find oftentimes that if accounting is driving it, we may let operations or sales off the hook, and they'll go back to using spreadsheets and manual means and informal means. Excel is often the enemy of ERP systems. We all love it for unstructured work because we can create logs and create flat databases, length by width, rows and columns. But especially with Excel, you end up not being able to share information. And if information sharing is not a company strategy, we find Excel files all over the place, replacing ERP modules. And then oftentimes it's a lack of educational or conceptual education. And I don't mean that, condescendingly. People are just unaware of some of the capabilities or the nitty-gritty on how they work. So how do we eliminate utilization gaps? One is enlightenment, showing people that they own software that will do what they want. They just creating an awareness campaign. It amazes me how many of these enterprise software companies, salespeople want to tell you everything about their software before you buy it. But once you've bought it, they pay you no time and no attention in terms of educating you on how to find more. We retain research on 90 different ERP systems, according to about 2,600 features. So it's not exhaustive, but that's one thing that we help provide clients is where their software vendors aren't enlightening them, we will help that. We are big fans of people taking educational courses to get that foundational knowledge through Apex or local community colleges, theories of scheduling and theories of planning and the difference between order point, min, max, and MRP. All of those kind of things we think are very worthwhile endeavors. Education is different than training. Training is what buttons do I push to make that concept work in my system. And here's where, developing a curriculum for each individual. What do you need to be trained on, either for new employees or maybe even some refresher training? OSHA requires that people get trained every year on lockout, tagout, and confined spaces. Well, software training, if we want to be efficient, maybe some refresher training once a year for your staff would be a good program to have. Certainly, these days, it's also a way to keep and reward people, and maybe reward or incentivize some completion. Treat the utilization improvements and increased adoption as a mini re-implementation, and certainly adopt the where there's a will, there's a way mentality. Some of this is just attitudinal and behavioral. If you let people go off and do their own thing, they will. I'm just as guilty, and I'm here. Sometimes I don't even accept or buy into my own preaching. Two other gaps that I'm going to pay a little less time to is structural gaps. This is where the software no longer fits structurally. So it's much more broad and deep than a functional gap. For example, if your company is a single legal entity and you buy a sister company and you now have to do multi-company accounting, setting them up and running them as separate databases works for a while. But if you're doing consolidations, or if you need to look at information across companies, it's going to start to fall apart. Same thing for our clients that acquire or set up a new plant, a separate plant. Running two plants inside a single instance, single database is often preferred. But if you can't do it and you need to set up separate databases, that'll work for a while. But if you're looking to have cross-plant operations, or one plant supplying a semi-finished product to another, you can start to struggle, or it becomes cumbersome by setting up a buy-sell relationship. Same thing for companies that add warehouses and need storage facilities for tracking inventory. The other multis, like multi-currency or multi-language. We've had clients that expand overseas and all of a sudden find a system that does great for domestic processing, doesn't really help them when they need to do to export product into Quebec, or deal with users that speak Spanish and not English. So this is where also things like charts of accounts, or if the costing method no longer meets your needs. If changing a costing method is not something we'd ever recommend that a company customize, because it has tentacles into so many aspects of the system. So if you identify structural gaps, it doesn't mean that there aren't short-term workarounds, but that's the time to start with retirement planning. Kind of like you've hit 60, you want to hit 65 in 5 years, start planning for your retirement. And same thing goes with technology gaps. If the software company didn't keep up, there's not much that can be done about it. We're helping a client right now whose job shop system runs on a database called FoxPro. If you aren't aware of it, don't worry about it. Microsoft bought it and mothballed it 20 years ago. And so what this company is finding is they just can't do much. They're having to run old Windows machines to run it. And they're just, they're unable to connect to external environments. And the cost of supporting it is just prohibitive. So they've used it for a number of years. They've gotten their money's worth out of it and then some, but it's also slowing down. And so they've exhausted their stopgap. And now what they're finding is, as they're going to market to buy additional manufacturing plants, they realize they don't have a scalable manufacturing ERP solution. So they're looking to replace it at their current 3 plants. And then so they have a platform for growth. There are some stop gaps, but I would advise anybody here, if you've got technology gaps, these are short-term workarounds, because you've got to run the business, but it's also time to start the retirement planning. There's also some reasons, and again, my firm does not sell software. We don't take commissions. We don't get any benefit monetarily from companies buying new systems. But what we can advise, and we do advise users and business owners, that modernizing actually can influence and increase the adoption and utilization of systems. And it comes from the fact of people, as you get a modern system, people will be using systems that look and feel like systems that they might be using at home. For this client that's running this system on an old Fox Pro database, they've joked that their users, both on the shop floor and in the office, are coming to work and using lesser technology than they have available to them in their homes. And what we have found, this right here is actually a screenshot from a new startup software company down in Pittsburgh called Bazawi. Not many people have heard of them, but they've got a nice, relatively new product, somewhat immature. But you look at that and you go, wow, how much training would I really need? It looks like Amazon that I use at home. It looks like other web-based application, online banking or whatever that I use at home. Same with this Windows 11 looking screen that I copied from another ERP, one of their competitors. So I just wanted to let you know that the modern systems will often come with familiarity. They're a bit more flexible in terms of moving the screens around, moving fields around, kind of a have it your way user interface. And they often come with online training videos. I can tell you as a older Gen Xer, I don't like training videos, but I do know that my kids love them. They love watching 5 to 10 minute videos. And we have found that the Gen Ys, will gravitate towards that. So there are benefits to modern systems beyond just look how cool this new technology is. So where do we go from here? I think I've shown you the fit and analysis that we've gotten from a couple of examples. I wanted to, let me go back to our Navigator. This client, interestingly enough, despite the fact that if I grab all of their weights and I grab their current system and we look at the filters, that looks good. Unfortunately, what we found with this company is that while the current system has a theoretical fit of 88 to 92% fit, depending on which version you're talking about, they were going to have to put a pile of money into improving it. They right now are working on improving the utilization from 50% using that checklist for the next year or two. But because of the cost of some of the more exotic and really highly desired features that they don't want to invest in, they're also simultaneously taking that requirements profile and looking at new systems because they fear that they might be throwing good money after bad with Infor's visual. So you've got some, it's not an either or, stick with what you've got, fix it. That was the initial view until we started getting some dollars and cents there. On the other hand, with sample company 1, that we'll show you here, these folks stuck with it, and because their current system was a 92% fit and they had very little money to put into it. They might have put, I think they bought 0 new modules, 0 add-ons. They were already upgraded to the latest version. They simply spent some time in education and training. Some of the education we provided, the software vendors, consultants provided the training on how to better configure the system. And that's what enabled them to go from a 24% utilization in 2018-19 to 70% in late 2020. And we think if we get back in there later this summer, this could be probably up into the 85% utilization. because we've been working with them on the scheduling application. So different ways you can go about this. So we'll close that, bring back up the presentation. So, so our guidelines generally are, first in Harrington speak, measure where you're at, your software's potential fit and your level of utilization thereof. If the fit is less than 80%, you've got a problem that warrants either replacement or upgrade. Our data can help a client see whether an upgrade will deliver that 80+% fit. If it does, then do the upgrade and move on with retaining it, because replacement is very disruptive. But what we have found is that if the fit is less than 80%, there's a lot of structural problems that are very likely to warrant replacement. It's not a hard and fast rule, but that's generally what we've seen. Now, if the level of utilization or if the level of fit is greater than 80%, either initially or via upgrade, then you can look at your level of utilization. If the level of utilization is below 70, as you saw with those two clients, then what we take a re-engineering approach. You're probably going to need some outside assistance and guidance, probably from someone who's independent and can represent your views, but you're certainly going to need some help from the software vendor. If your level of utilization is between 70 and 90%, in our view, you've done really well. That maybe isn't world-class, but it's B+ to A- class. And at that point, we would recommend just continue monitoring. You've demonstrated that you can manage an ERP system well. You don't need us. You don't need your outsiders, or stay the course, but keep monitoring. Conduct another audit a year later. Treat it like you're like a company that has passed ISO certification, and you want to continue monitoring and improving your quality. Take that continuous improvement approach. So how do we go about this? One, well, you saw how we work with a client. The first thing is stating those goals and objectives. What are they? And why would we invest money? This is a question we always put to business owners or key users or IT directors. Why would we invest money in intangible software assets instead of production equipment? And how can our customers be better served? How can we increase our return on assets? What other stakeholders might benefit? Our customers, our suppliers, our employees. That you can usually get, most of our clients are able to get anywhere from 5 to 20 goals and objectives as guiding principles identified. Then we provide somewhere between 12 to 20 points, depending on your complexity, to come up with a very simple, it's a couple-hour exercise of an ERP strategy, just to make sure that what you're seeking out of an ERP system aligns with your business strategy. For example, if your business competes on low cost, low price, you're a cost leader, a price leader, then mature technology with low cost, no muss, no fuss, limited customization, and a plain vanilla implementation is the appropriate strategy. If your company competes on customer service, responsiveness, speed, you want to have a strong CRM with customer-facing applications like a portal. If you compete because you've got the best mousetrap, you've differentiated your product from your competitors. Here, this is where we actually suggest moderate to heavy levels of customization with strong product lifecycle management, strong engineering change control, strong configure price quote modules, any or all of those three. So it's really about aligning the enterprise software strategy with the business strategy. Very frequently, we'll work with a company who has customized the heck out of their software, and we find, not because they're about service and response or product differentiation, it was just that they had an IT guy who liked to tinker with the toys. Same thing for your supply chain model. Are you engineer to order on one end of the spectrum, make to stock or buy for resale on the other end of the spectrum? Where do you lie there? And is your software vendor and package particularly good at that? If you're engineer to order, you're probably going to need some project capability. If you're distribution, you might need some drop ship capability. So some of those feed this, but where do you want to be on the technology continuum? We've had some clients that say their enterprise software needs to be a strategic competitive weapon. We've had others that say, you know what, as long as it gets us by, no muss, no fuss. Same thing for things like fitment. Do we need a custom? We're working with a client right now whose business owner believes that packaged software will be very highly challenged to replace their custom system. That's what we're helping them rationalize right now is that a true statement or not? Vis-a-vis, sometimes buying clothes off the shelf is good enough. And most of our clients, I will say, end up in the middle, kind of a bell curve here where it's tailorable. Get a suit off the rack and have the sleeves cut to fit your short arms. So a good thing to do at this point is to develop a business case and to put some numbers behind it. I will say this, it's very hard to justify the investment in the old ways of doing things such as headcount reduction, inventory reduction, days of AR versus days of AP reduction. Those rags have been wrung. And in most cases, we're looking for speed, accuracy, and bending a cost curve such that we can scale our business and grow our business without a commensurate increase in headcount. Those are hard to do, harder to do a cost justification on. I will freely admit that. So takeaways, decide on your strategy early. There's no right or wrong answers, but they will save time in subsequent steps. If this is something that I'm pretty sure the NWIRC can help with, if they can't, we certainly can, but we are big fans of adopting business process mapping and modeling as a core competency for companies. I'm more comfortable training clients on how to do this work rather than doing it for them because it can be pretty expensive. And I think I sincerely believe it's something that should be a core competency. But we're big fans of, in these kind of endeavors, using cross-functional process maps to identify waste. Here's a couple of examples. Once you've mapped the process, then it's a very simple rubric to use. Take a look at each step. If the step is value added, keep it. If it's non-value added but necessary, automate it. And if it's non-value added entirely, eliminate it. And that approach works pretty well. After that, you should be able to distill out of that your detailed software requirements. We recommend, if you're doing an upgrade, identify that requirements list. If you're doing an extension to other plants or companies, if you're doing a replacement, of course, you want to identify your requirements. Or if you're doing a detailed gap fit assessment, like we showed earlier, do that detailed requirements assessment. And by the way, this presentation will be made available to you. These are the topics that we suggest manufacturing companies take a look at. There are online tools to help you, templates to help you develop a requirements profile for sales orders, for MRP, for scheduling. We've highlighted these in red where we often see that they're done outside of ERP, hopefully not in spreadsheets, maybe in a best-in-class scheduling system, a best-in-class maintenance management system. But they can be and often are part of an ERP system. We would love for you to use our ERP Navigator, which has that set of attributes. To you, it's a question of importance. And those 2,500 to the vendors are, do you support this feature? So we suggest for each of those topics being able to identify at least 50, 250 might be high, but certainly a lot of requirements. Take a look at your master files and your transactions. Relate them to your goals and objectives. If something is vital, we absolutely have to have blanket purchase orders and multiple releases. Well, What is the reason for that? There must be a goal to, minimize or maximize economies of scale in purchasing, whatever it is. Rank them or weight them relative to each other. For anything that you put a high weight on, not just tie it to a goal, but explain why. What's the business scenario? We need finite production scheduling because we are molders and our mold press can only run, so fast or whatever it is. And get a variety of input. You certainly want some visionary employees and change agents, what maybe ones that have worked at other companies. But also don't forget those skeptics who prefer the status quo. For every hard charger, find an Eeyore, if you remember Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. And certainly get executive involvement and oversight, mainly to make sure that the details are aligning with the business goals and objectives. Here's a sample of just some statements. We need the ability to link a shop order or a work order to a sales order, because for our make to order jobs, we want to print customer information on shop documents. We want to do forecasting with a seasonality model. Why? Because we sell our products to the construction market which is highly seasonal. This is the type of what we consider to be a requirements gathering exercise that's very self-reflective and tends to lead, once you've done this, you will lead to increased adoption. Multiple costing methods within a plant, straight from a client of ours out near the border of Ohio and Pennsylvania. They have one product line, and I hid them here, but a very standard, repetitive, they want to use standard costing for. They've got another product line that's very job shoppish and they want to do actual costing on. So we can't ignore the technology aspects of this. They're certainly considering. We have found, though, if you want to retain your current system, the stack itself, the inherent technology like the database, the operating system, those tend to be givens and not a lot of options. They're worth looking into, but the user features such as query tools, business analytics, personalization and customization tools, workflow and integration tools, we often find these on the right are underutilized and untapped capacity that can bring greater satisfaction and utilization out of existing systems. So these are well worth investigating, those 6 right there. So, the requirements building process can certainly do it yourself from a blank sheet of paper. But before you do that, I would recommend, do a Google search. There are online templates. Consultants like us will bring experience and our tools to you, but we aren't free. And so there's always that aspect to it. Depends on whether you're more of a do-it-yourselfer. The process is really very simple. Review your business processes that are supported by the current package, any customization that you've done, any reports or spreadsheets, any manual systems, and really focus on what's unique to you. Once you've done that, then it's a simple, now it's put on your ISO hat and audit. Does the system support my features, my requirements, and am I using them? And if so, and determine if the current system does them out of the box fully. Does it require some tailoring, kind of low customization, medium customization, heavy customization that I got to pay a vendor to do? Could I get there by buying an embedded add-on module or a bolt-on that requires a separate database? And if they are supported in one of these matters or degrees, then are we utilizing it? We simply treat it binary, yes or no, but we've had other clients suggest we use a letter grade. Yes, we're using it, but not very effectively, or we're using it but there's room for improvement. There, we're probably splitting hairs. Without getting into it, this is, if you want the presentation, this will give you some formulas, how you assign numeric weights to the weights, sum up the weights, there's your denominator, then give the vendor partial credit or full credit, depending on their response, sum that up, and there's your numerator for the fit. On utilization, give them full credit if they're using it. If you want to do an ABC, give them a 95, 85 for partial credit. and you divide the sum of the uses divided by the total requirements weights to get a percent utilization. Our tool that I showed you does that. It works well, and it's a nice grading way to do that. And this takes us back to what we started with Harrington, which is if you measure it and you know which items are available but not fulfilled, it's a quick working list. The thing to consider, and this is the one where we had the stumbling block with our client in St. Mary's, and that is as we started adding up the costs, the theoretical fit of the software vendor was really good, 92% of the existing vendor, but we subsequently found that there were modules and add-ons that had to be purchased, and we were well north of $100,000, at which case, appropriately so, the business owner and the C-suite said, look, do we really want to throw another $100,000 into this system that we've had for 14 years? People are generally not happy with it. It's middle of the road technology at best. Wouldn't we be best putting that 100 to 150,000 into a new, more modern system? And that's what we're weighing with them right now. So the decision has not been made, but certainly once you've taken that pulse check and you see where you're at, one of our clients found they had all the tools they needed. They didn't need to buy any add-ons. Unfortunately, our client in St. Mary's was going to have to invest a lot more to get to that theoretical fit. And that was unseemly. So certainly you want to consider those those costs. It's hardware such as servers, tablets, software licenses, as we found big for this one. And then there's that internal resource time. A good guideline that we have found is that if your consultants, and this is often the vendor's consultants, for every hour they propose, your internal time are going to be 5 to 10 times that. So make sure that you include time for your internal folks to spend with them. And then, there are competing opportunity costs. There's other capital expenditures and the internal resource time. If you're embarking on some other mass improvement while doing an ERP improvement, your folks won't have time to do their day jobs. And then the last element that we'll conclude with is how do you go about implementing the changes that you want to do, either the upgrade, the additional features, or just turning on features that have been sitting there idle. What we have found is there's often a conflict between time to benefit and the time required. Most companies would prefer theoretically to do an all-in approach, which reduces the time and concentrates the effort, but their people don't have the time available because they've got other things to do in the course of a day. So more often than not, we see our clients go into a phased approach to minimize business disruption. Maybe they'll weight them, they'll tackle specific modules or features, locations or departments. This is, I'd say, the practical approach. This is the ideal approach, but more often than not, we're not seeing or offered the ideal approach. But certainly before you embark on that, compare your software vendors' preferred approaches and ask them what has worked for other companies that use their software. From an internal resource, the old days of ERP systems being implemented or re-implemented, having it done for you, this consultant-driven approach we think has gone by the wayside, especially for small and mid-sized manufacturers. And somewhere there's a hybrid between a combo approach with partners and a do-it-yourself approach. It just seems to be more practical. You want to make sure that you develop a budget and timeline. This is an example that you get as a takeaway. And then this is the change management process that we recommend, whether you're doing a new implementation, an upgrade, or a replacement. Educate the team after doing that project plan on how the system or modules work that are under consideration. Simulate the business in those, after you've had that basic education, kind of boot camp basic training. Out of that, you will specify some data conversion, some customizations, some special reports and dashboards, and define your operating procedures. This is how we're going to use the system in this new world. When you've got all of that done, then you can do a dress rehearsal or conference room pilot. And then and only then do you go out and train the masses and cut over and go live. So it's really very much adheres to the measure twice, cut once approach. Another takeaway before we get to the wrap up here is, and this is more to business owners, be realistic about compensation. The more you use ERP systems, the more skills your workers have, the more they're able to handle some heavy lifting, but you don't want to pay them like the guy here digging the ditch. And in this case, the two salient questions are, which one of these people is working harder and working up a sweat, yet which one gets paid more? Same thing goes for operating modern ERP systems. So in conclusion, some of the takeaways: we are fans of measuring your system's fit and utilization just like a machine, and updating those requirements, the fit and utilization, at least annually, if not every, couple of years. Develop work procedures and process maps to institutionalize the use of your ERP systems and CRM. Very much like the quality system procedures are meant to institutionalize your business processes. Recognize the impact of internal and external changes on your processes and supporting software. Don't let the sales guys promise everything to the customers and then have IT and the operations and accounting folks figure out how to make it happen inside a stodgy old ERP system. And then when you go about any endeavor to improve the use of the system and upgrade, even a new implementation, for every dollar you spend in software, spend $1 on education and training. We've just found that to be a good guide for maximum use and maximum satisfaction with the software. There's a term called shelfware, and that's what the term used for software that sits on a shelf, isn't used, but the company spent a lot of money on it because they didn't invest in the education and training. So the close, I just wanted to, my quick bio, or at least of our firm. Meaden Moore is an accounting and consulting firm that's been around over 100 years. We have 250 professionals, 5 of which live in Northwest Pennsylvania, kind of the Erie Meadville area. We work only with manufacturers, distributors, and industrial service firms. Most of us are industry, or all of us are industry experienced, and we're independent. So there was no sales pitch here for licenses or anything like that. So thank you for the opportunity today. I wanted to see if there's any questions at this point. I didn't hear anything from Molly. So if there's anything that you would like to know, now's a good time.
Great, thank you, Scott. We do not have any questions, but we'll give a final offer. If anyone wants to go ahead and use that Q&A box, you can ask a question now as we finish wrapping up. Just want to thank you, Scott, for this information. Sure. And everyone for attending. And we do have a webinar with Scott on February 3rd on ERP, CRM, and enterprise software package selection. So a different spin if you're looking at possibly choosing new software packages. Scott will be leading us through a discussion on that on February 3rd. You can go to our website, nwirc.org, for more information or to register. And I don't see any questions coming through, so we'll go ahead and end this. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. And thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Molly. Thanks, everyone.